what is the ultimate sign that your ministry, your vocation, your work, whatever it is bearing fruit? Is the emergence of new disciples and apostles around you. Everything else, all this wonderful stuff we do, and I know it is very important. All the children you get through sacramental prep, all the people you get through RCIA and to Easter, all the children that you give religious education to, all the youth groups you run, all the campus ministries that you are part of, all that is the administration, the programs, the structures are important, but they are important because they lead to the one end. We are not here to keep the ecclesial trains running on time. Even though a lot of us, that's what we spend most of our time doing, right? That's what we feel like. But what is the end? The end is new disciples and apostles arising around us. Now, a few things from the book. I will not bore you with all the statistics that make everybody depressed. Okay, I've been told all over the world how depressing that first chapter is. That's fine. I just want to revisit a couple of really important things. One is religious identity is fluid in our time. We live in a culture that does not support inherited religious faith. It actually penalizes religious groups, not just Catholics, but any religious group that depends upon inherited religious faith. And it actually benefits, interestingly enough, it actually benefits groups that actively evangelize. So we need to understand that is the world we are living in. The majority of U.S. adults have left the faith of their childhood at some point, not just Catholics, any faith, including, interestingly enough, adults who were raised without a faith will leave no faith. The majority of adults raised without a faith will choose one as a young adult. All that means is everybody feels it's like a rite of passage. It's part of becoming a young adult. You choose your love, you choose your work, and you choose your faith or lack thereof. It's all part of defining yourself. This is the new cultural norm. So even though you and I may have done fantastic job raising our children in the faith, we've been faithful and fabulous catechists and religious educators and parents and youth ministers, when they get to be young adults, they will probably revisit it anyway. It is, please do not feel you have failed. That is not what is going on. Now they are saying, now I have to decide whether it is my own. Now this is brand new. This is not in your handouts. It just came out 2 days before I left to come here. So I stuck it in. But what's fascinating about this, these are new figures from CARE, which is the Center for Research in the Applied Apostolate. And basically, for one thing, they estimate the number of people, of Americans who thought they were Catholic at some point in their life is much larger than we knew. Over 100 million people in our country considered themselves to be Catholic at some point in their life. And of that number, over 40 million have dropped the identity. I'm sorry, 32 million. There's 32 million former Catholics in this country. And there's another 10 million who hold on to the identity but aren't registered anywhere. So we don't even know they exist. So there's about 40 million people that we sort of kind of went off our radar, that we lost, so to speak. Imagine being so big you can lose 40 million people. But that's what that they are part of it. When we talk about, when you do those, like in October, they do those, surveys of who comes to Mass, and then the diocese reports it. Usually what we're doing is comparing Who's there to the number of people who are actually registered? But that represents only about 60% of Catholics, of people who consider themselves Catholic at some point in their life. So, and about 24%, they said, of Catholics who we know of, okay, of the 76 million Americans who say they are Catholic, 24% of them are at Mass on Sunday. They would say, I go every Sunday. So we've got, by most standards, in a lot of countries that I've worked in, we have a lot of active people. I'm telling you, in Australia, in England, in Ireland, they would love to have our numbers or anything even close to it at Mass. And yet, compared to the number of people who we baptized at some point, the majority, of course, are not here. Now, so as we said, choosing your faith has now become normative, and the fastest growing population you've heard of are nuns, right? Not N-U-N-S, right? But N-O-N-E. I come from the land of none. I'm from Seattle, Washington. We are famous for our practical agnosticism. 60% of Seattleites, if you ask them if they're part of a religious tradition, they will tell you no. And I don't mean Christian, I mean anything. Okay, so we're famously the land of none. That was even I actually came across a tourist magazine that wrote an article about Seattle, the land of none. So it's part of our tourist identity now. That along with coffee, latte land, and all that stuff. Okay, and rain. So we had this large number of people who are now dropping all religious identities. Who are they? They're primarily the people who only had a name but never practiced. What is happening is the people who kept the identity but never darkened the door are dropping the identity. Because there's no point for it anymore. There's no need, there's no value for it in their life. They don't see any purpose, so they just drop it. That is what is happening. It's the non-practicing mostly that are doing that. Now, there was an amazing, really helpful study that came out in Canada after the book was published. So this is not in there. But what I loved about it is they looked at young adults who'd been raised in a Christian faith, mainline Protestant, evangelical Protestant, Catholic, across Canada, and they said, who stayed? Who is still there practicing as a young adult? They found there were 4 basic things. First of all, young adults who said they had experienced God's presence and they had seen answered prayer. In other words, they had a real encounter. They saw evidence of a living God. That was a very important factor. They had been able to ask and discuss their real spiritual questions within the Christian community. They understood, they had a chance to wrestle with the gospel story, with the kerygma, with the great story of Jesus in real depth and what it meant for them. And they have seen communities, they had older adults in their life, maybe their parents, maybe other people, but older adults who were living lives of discipleship around them. If these 4 things were true, they were there. And if they weren't, they were gone. And what's really important to look at is these are not primarily doctrinal issues. It isn't about the church's teaching in the sense that often we think of it. It's about seeing it lived, having a living encounter with Christ, seeing other people who are living it, being able to wrestle with the real implications for real life, and encountering Jesus. If that was true, they were there. They were bucking the culture because they had a reason to. That was personal and that really meant something to them. And that is the really big issue. That's one of the things that most people tell me, the one statistic that just makes people crazy. Bishops, everybody, they say that statistic, that the majority, that actually a majority of American Catholics are not certain they can have a personal relationship with God. And when I found that myself, I was stunned. I could not take it in that only 48% of American Catholic adults could say they were certain. They didn't say they had a relationship with God. They just were certain it was possible. No wonder so few of us ever talk about our understanding of God with anybody else. I mean, American Catholics are less likely to talk about it than American atheists are. But if you don't know there's a personal God, and the younger you are, the less likely you are to believe this, why would you talk about it? Now, the majority of Catholics, here's our issue. Here's where we are. We have a majority who actually don't know that personal relationship with God is possible. And this is exactly what St. John Paul the Great was saying in Catechesis in our time. He said, many Catholics are still without that explicit personal attachment to Jesus Christ. They only have the capacity to believe. Think about that. Capacity to believe placed within them by baptism and the presence of the Holy Spirit. That's what baptism gives us, the capacity. But are we using the capacity?